Welcome, Councilmember Alvarez. Can we go ahead and test your audio and video, please?
Hello?
Hello, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Vice Mayor Rogers, are you able to test your video and audio for us? Welcome, Mayor Rogers. Can we go ahead and test your audio?
All right, should be working.
Wonderful, thank you so much.
All right, Magali, are we all ready to get started?
I believe so. We have everyone from the team here.
Excellent. Great. I'll go ahead and call us to order here at 6 o'clock. Madam City Clerk, do you want to call the roll?
Well, I was not hosting the meeting or who clerks the meetings, but Councilmember Alvarez?
Present.
Vice Mayor Rogers?
Present.
Mayor Rogers?
And I'm here.
Let the record show that all committee members are here.
See, you showed up, and so we put you to work.
I know. It's all good.
Yeah. Before we get too far into this, do we want our host to explain for the public how they might better participate in today's meeting, and in particular, how to do public comments? I'm not quite sure who is hosting tonight, to be honest.
Hello, Mayor Rogers. My name is Madeline Brown. I am your virtual host for the evening. For those who are attending, for those who are attending via Zoom, you can go ahead and raise your hand for public comment. You have the option to make a public comment once per item, and you'll have 3 minutes that will be timed. And if you are calling in, you can go ahead and raise your hand by dialing #9, and we will allow you, again, 3 minutes to talk. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. And I apologize. Should have done the introductions a little bit earlier. So with that, we will go to public comments for non-agenda items. For folks who are interested in having a discussion at a future agenda item, or if they have questions, go ahead and hit the raise hand feature. Due to the Brown Act, we can't typically get in a back and forth with folks, and we can't discuss items that we haven't previously agendized, but we can definitely take down notes and try to get back to folks. So first I see Pat.
Pat?
I didn't mean to raise my hand. I will lower it.
Okay, thank you, Pat.
Pat is just doing what we call a practice run.
Thank you.
We'll go to Eric.
Eric Frazier, you can go ahead and make your public comment. Do you see the timer on your screen?
Yes, thank you. I don't see the timer yet, but hopefully you can hear me okay.
Oh, wait, let me get it.
No problem.
There we go.
Yeah, hello, everybody. I hope everybody's staying well. And thank you very much for the opportunity to comment on a very important topic. I appreciate the work that's been done so far. And of course, I've been following along with the progress that the city has made and spearheaded by our great mayor. Appreciate that, Chris. There was some subjects that were not covered that I had brought up earlier in the process. And I've also brought them up with the county and other agencies, and we'll be dialing in on this a little bit more. And that has to do with how records are prepared and just sort of the process of how information is collected and presented by a government agency. So as you know, I'm a pretty frequent flyer when it comes to CPRA and also to, trying to get at the base rock of facts in order to serve them back to decision makers, but also have access to everybody involved so that they can have facts to agree on and get away from emotional charged arguments. Some of the things that I see are defects in surveys that collect information. And I think that there should be a standard for how surveys are created and utilized. Another area of a problem is when reports are done either by outside contractors or by city staff, a lot of times those really need to be peer reviewed. Those reports sometimes can be very inaccurate and misleading because they don't complete a picture, they don't present the whole picture, or they actually present information that's not factual, can't be verified. Furthermore, within a report, information that's presented as an opinion should be marked as such. The authors of the information should be listed on the information, and there should be an opportunity for them to correct the information if contrary information comes to light. The author should be held to a high standard of putting their name on something and being held accountable under penalty of perjury, quite frankly. A lot of these reports are used to make important decisions that affect people's lives, and I think then that the people that are producing the information that makes an issue actionable need to be held accountable. Furthermore, if you do have peer review that goes with a report, that should ride along with the report. And so if somebody has a public records request, that peer-reviewed opinion should go along with that original report. Reports should be dated. A lot of times information comes forward, doesn't even have a date on it. It's ridiculous. So I think just within the preparation of information and documents, there's a lot that can be done. I appreciate using this 3 minutes. I hope it was helpful.
No, absolutely, and thank you, Eric. And one of the conversations we'll be continuing to have is how the ordinance actually operates and how to bolster that. So I appreciate your comments. I took some notes down for as we get into those discussions. Did we have any pre-recorded voicemail public comments on this?
No pre-recorded and no email comments, and there are no further hands raised.
Perfect. Then let's go ahead and go on to item 4.1, an update on the Open Government Ordinance implementation. Sue, are you leading us off on this?
Yes, I am. I also will note, Sue Gallagher, City Attorney, and I will be walking through the PowerPoint presentation. I do want to point out that we have both the City Clerk and the Director of Community Engagement here, and they are both available as well to answer questions. And I also invite them both to speak up whenever they have anything to add or to clarify. So thank you very much. As you know, the City of Santa Rosa embraces a culture of open government in an effort to ensure public trust, to engage the community, and to establish a system of transparency, public participation, and collaboration. This is a very high priority for the city government, as you well know. Last December, the council adopted the open government ordinance. That ordinance codified some existing practices and then added some additional requirements to increase opportunities for public participation and access to local government. So we'll start in on the slides. Next slide. Thank you. The new ordinance included 8 primary elements. The agenda requirements for city council meetings, the requirements for broadcast of meetings, some new requirements and some codification of existing requirements on closed session items and litigation reports, some new requirements and some codification of existing requirements on public access and public comment. Some, again, new requirements and codification of existing practices with respect to the minutes of city council meetings. Then we have a whole section of the ordinance that addresses public records, including the responsibilities of staff in those efforts and the disclosure, some standards for the disclosure of records. We have a full section on open data being available online at the city's website. And then finally, several procedural provisions for residents or others to file an appeal of an action taken by either the council or staff, and then also for providing for enforcement of the terms of the ordinance. The ordinance and all of its provisions will go into effect on July 1st, 2021. And in the interim period, the council really designed that. So we have an interim period to ramp up, to begin implementation, and to work out any glitches. The council directed staff to return to the council in March to report on the status of that implementation and to report any impacts that we were seeing. So today's report is just the start of that initial evaluation of how the implementation is going. And today we'll really focus primarily on the agenda requirements and the meeting requirements. I know there's a lot to talk about in the other elements as well, but tonight we'll be focused again just on the agenda and meeting requirements. When we come to the full council on March 23rd, we will address those other sections as well. The next slide. In terms of the agenda requirements, the ordinance codified several existing requirements, including the obligation to provide a meaningful description of each item on the agenda, to provide for publication, early publication of supporting documents, and also provisions about how we might proceed if an item has failed to appear on the preliminary agenda, but it is council's desire or staff's desire that it be heard based on publication in the final agenda. So those are some existing agenda requirements and provisions, and the ordinance codified those into the city code. But one of the most significant new elements is the requirement that all city council agendas be translated into Spanish. And that practice, we have implemented that practice. So beginning with the February 9th agenda, all city council agendas, including preliminary and final agendas, have been translated into Spanish. The translated agendas are readily available online through the city's agenda link. And that is there on the slide, santa-rosa.legistar.com. And you can see on the slide, again, the print's rather small, but that is a screenshot of the Legistar page. And you see between the meeting details and the agenda in English is a link to the Spanish language agenda. Note that also, the Gov delivery notice for City Council agendas is also now issued in English and Spanish. Next slide. And if I do want to note that with those new translation requirements, those new requirements do add 3 additional business days to the agenda process to give our translation service time to complete the translation. So now we can turn to the agenda requirements on timing. And these are new provisions. Each element is new. Preliminary agenda is now required and is now published no later than 12 business days prior to the council meeting. That began again on February 9th city council meeting and has continued. So we are publishing the preliminary agenda 12 business days prior to the council meeting. At that time, if there are agenda items that are completed and are agenda ready, they are posted at that time as well. A week later, the preliminary agenda is now republished at 8 business days prior to the council meeting date with any additional documents. So it's our goal to have all remaining, whatever was not yet agenda ready, 12 business days prior to the council meeting. We are aiming to have all of those remaining agenda items agenda ready and published 8 business days prior to the council meeting. Gov delivery notices are sent out as documents are available. So a Gov delivery notice will go out with the initial preliminary agenda, and then when the preliminary agenda is republished, the 8 business days prior. I will note that there are no changes to the agenda itself between those 2 dates. The preliminary agenda is set at that 12 business days prior to the council meeting. The final agenda is now published no later than 4 business days prior to the city council meeting date. In the event that there are any agenda items that were not published with the preliminary agenda, second republishing of the preliminary agenda, they will be attached at that final agenda date. Next slide. Thank you. We now turn to the meeting requirements. And in a later slide, we'll review some of the new meeting procedures. But again, one of the most significant changes to the city council meetings themselves is the new provision for Spanish translation at all regular city council meetings. And we have on the web page how folks can access that Spanish translation. And as you know, that is also announced at each council meeting, both in English and in Spanish, of how people might access the Spanish channel to hear the live Spanish translation. We have in fact provided live Spanish translation at several of the meetings since early February, and beginning next week's meeting, March 16th, and going forward, that live Spanish translation will be provided at all regularly scheduled meetings. I do want to note that apparently there has been some confusion about whether live Spanish translation is required under the new ordinance, and it is, and the citation to the section is there on the slide, 1-10.030 subsection N. Apparently, and we're looking into it, it appears that the wrong version of the ordinance was signed and put into our system. So we will obviously correct that very quickly and have the proper version, the version that the council did in fact adopt. We will have that up and in order in our website very soon. And next slide. This has to do with publication of the ordinance itself. The Open Government Ordinance does require that the ordinance itself be readily available to the public, and those steps have been taken. The ordinance is available to the public at the link shown on the slide. And beginning next week, language is added to the City Council agenda on how to obtain a free paper copy of the Open Government Ordinance, should you so desire. Next slide. So now we turn to some of the impacts that we've seen thus far. And this is evolving. We will have additional reporting out on the 23rd when we come to the full council. But at least thus far, the impacts of the ordinance have been tied to the length of the advance agenda noticing. So first, some operational impacts. The preliminary agenda, I will note that there's an error on this slide, and I apologize for that. The preliminary agenda language, in fact, must be completed 3 full weeks before the council meeting. This is a result of the 12 business day posting requirement combined with the translation services need for 3 business days prior to posting. So 15 business days before the council meeting, staff needs to have the preliminary agenda language in final form. We have started to see some challenges with this timing, and in particular, federal funding and grant submittals often work. Our initial preparation of materials is being done based on early estimates, and those estimates often change by the time we're getting to council 3 weeks later, and so that results in changes to the published documents as well. We are also having some challenges in turnaround time from the Planning Commission review and decision to then get it to the council agenda. And if we wait until the Planning Commission has made its decision, we're going to be too late. In some instances, we're going to be too late for the preliminary agenda, and we're going to have to delay bringing it to council. Another area of challenge is community engagement. This means we have to really have things very well prepared and able to engage with the community prior to even the posting of the preliminary agenda 3 weeks earlier, in order to be able to have that language reflect what the staff's recommendation is actually going to be. We're also seeing some challenges in having that earlier community engagement, trying to work through any changes that come out of that in time for final posting of the agenda materials, and then that delay between the times that we've talked with the community, the time we're going to council, and maintaining that momentum of community engagement. Next slide. Second, I want to talk about a little bit about the impacts that we're seeing on staff. Because we are publishing a preliminary agenda, republishing a second preliminary agenda, and then publishing a final agenda, and sometimes then republishing the final agenda with modifications after that initial publication. We are republishing the agenda to release the additional documents as become available, and to make any revisions that are happening, and then more delivery notices being sent out to subscribers. So that is adding burdens on particularly on the clerk's office. In addition, due to the shift from calendar to business days, the final agenda publishes on one day and the preliminary agenda publishes on a different day. So in general, absent a holiday, the final agenda will be posted on Wednesday. The preliminary agendas, both the initial and the republication, will publish on Thursday. We've also found that the new deadlines make for a very tight turnaround to get agendas translated into Spanish for the preliminary agenda. And so we are finding that traditionally, agenda review is now set from Mondays in order to avoid having to have one agenda review for the prelim and one agenda review for the final. We're setting that all on Mondays. That means, though, staff has to be ready on Monday to make any changes that come out of agenda review because we need to send that preliminary agenda to the translators that same day, later that same day. Next slide. I thought we'd give you a couple of examples of impacts that we're seeing Again, this is just a couple of the impacts on this slide and a couple more, and we'll provide you with more detail and more examples on the 23rd. So this is just an example of where the timing was such that we had to rely on exception to the ordinance. This concerned the county eviction protection ordinance. Our preliminary agenda was published on February 4th. This was for the council meeting on the February 23rd. So our preliminary agenda was published on February 4th. On February 9th, 5 days later, the Board of Supervisors adopted the urgency ordinance. That urgency ordinance stated that it would be operative within the city limits, absent some alternative action by the council. We then brought it to council on just a simple report out on February 23rd, 2 weeks later, and it required special findings to allow the council to even consider that report. That required under the ordinance and under our existing policy a finding of good cause. And again, just to remind folks, the finding of good cause is a finding that as a result of exceptional circumstances beyond the control of the council, compliance with the 12 business day notice requirement would impose a substantial burden on the city's ability to conduct its business or result in prejudice to a private person. The council did make that finding and did hear that report. I will note that then the council directed us to come back. It was difficult to try to turn it around quickly to get it back before council quickly, given those early publication requirements. So we are now intending to bring that back to council. In fact, I don't recall whether it's on the 13th, I believe, or maybe the 23rd. Next slide. Another issue that has come up is concerns construction contracts from Public Works. Construction contracts must be awarded within 60 days of bid opening, so that doesn't allow much room for delays. There's little time to discuss funding in case bids come in over budget. There is very little leeway if a council meeting is canceled or continued, or if the council meetings weren't scheduled, or if a vote is delayed or continued due to absences and or abstentions. The risk is that the city does not meet the contract award timelines. We are looking at whether we might address that through a revision to our template in the Public Works construction contract to increase the number of days to award a contract. We are also looking at state law to ensure that we can remain consistent with state law. Next slide. Another, another area of concern is the timing of items that require prior approval or recommendation from the Board of Public Utilities. In the past, we've often wanted to have the BPU meeting on the item and be able to have the council meeting on the same item within a couple of weeks. That's no longer possible. We need to, we have the option of either publishing a preliminary agenda with tentative language about the Board of Public Utilities actions. I'm guessing what that might be, leaving it with some flexibility, which raises some legal questions if we do that. Or second, we can delay the council consideration of the item. And again, sometimes these items are time sensitive, so that has been an issue that we're looking at how to address that. So those were just a couple of examples of challenges that we've identified at this point, or that we're facing at this point. But we will come back again on March 23rd with some additional examples and details, as well as some of the things that we're looking at to address those challenges and try to find some solutions. Next slide. broadcast requirements. These are some of the other requirements of the ordinance and the status of their implementation. The ordinance codified existing broadcasting procedures that all the meetings be recorded, indexed, and archived along with closed captioning in English. The ordinance now also requires that the closed captioning also be translated into Spanish for the archived videos. And so we are in conversation with the IT department. IT is researching the costs for closed captioning in Spanish, looking at what that is all going to entail, looking at what options we might have for outside contracts for that work. Still getting those details. Next slide. The ordinance also codified a number of existing procedures and practices related to public access to the city council meetings and ability to comment, to provide public comment. It codified procedures required related to the overflow of city council chamber. Of course, we don't have that issue currently, but we are hopeful that one day we will actually be back in person in council chambers. The ordinance does codify our public comment periods for non-agenda items. It does specify, as we already provide, that public comment must take place prior to action by the city council. It provides some limits on the start time of public hearings. So public hearings, as is in our existing regulations, no earlier than 5 p.m. Now also an upper limit of no later than 9 p.m. start time. As has already been implemented, changes or continuances of items are announced by the mayor at the beginning of the meeting. And I know often you and the former mayor would re-announce that periodically through the meeting for the public's convenience. And then documents from applicants and appellants are presented before a public hearing is open. So that is now codified. Next slide. And again, I should mention on that prior slide that we have had no issues. All of those items and requirements are already current practice. And so that is simply codification of those. In terms of public access and comments in progress, the preparation of the Citizens Guidebook is underway, and the guidebook will include city policies regarding public participation and public comment. It will provide a section on this, giving information on the city's governmental structure, organization, responsibilities, and basic functions. It will also include a glossary of local government terms and definitions, and will also include information on how to participate in local government activities and in meetings and various proceedings. And the Citizens Guidebook will be available in English and Spanish on the city's website. And I don't know if Magali has anything that she would like to add on that.
Sure, just essentially we're trying to help folks who have not traditionally participated to have an avenue and a way of understanding how to do so. So just that, thank you, Sue.
And I will mention the chair of the Community Advisory Board and I had a discussion earlier today, and she's very excited about this and the work that they're doing on it.
Great, very good. And next slide. Meeting minutes. These are straightforward, and for the most part, they codified existing procedures with some minor modifications. So the public comment speaker cards have an option for a one-sentence description, which the city clerk can use to create a brief description of the comments for inclusion in the final minutes. If video of the meeting is not available, then the draft minutes of the meeting will be available for inspection and copying upon request no later than 15 business days after the meeting, so 3 weeks. That is a new requirement under the ordinance. It applies only if a video of the meeting is not available. If the video of the meeting is available, the 15 business day deadline does not apply. And finally, the officially approved minutes shall be available for inspection and copying upon request no later than 5 business days after the meeting at which the minutes were approved. And the meeting minutes are posted through the city's website once they are approved. Again, these are straightforward, and I would invite if the city clerk has anything that she would like to add.
No, I don't have anything to add other than that the link for any approved minutes are on the same page where we have the agenda, the Spanish agenda. So there's a column for each of them, so they're easily, you can find them easily and click on them and download them. And if somebody wants a copy, they can always contact the city clerk's office if they want a hard copy, and I'd be happy to mail out a copy to them.
Thank you. And next slide. These are just our initial estimates of the costs incurred. This really relates to the costs of translation. So translation and then preparation of the Citizens Guidebook. The translated agendas, that projected monthly average is based on the February agendas, which were significantly shorter in written content than many of our agendas. So we did estimate a slightly larger number based on our expectation and experience of longer agendas. And that the projected monthly average was $2,400. Interpretation services for live translation at the council meetings. Our actual for February included 1 regular meeting and 3 goal-setting meetings. The projected monthly average is based on estimate of 3 meetings per month requiring translation services at an average of a little over 17 hours per month. And a cost of approximately $114 per hour plus premium costs for evening work. And again, that is estimated at just under $2,000 a month. The closed captioning translation into Spanish is estimated at $3,400 a month. And then the Citizens Guidebook is a one-time cost is for graphic design. And this is based on average for toolkit designs that we've done in the past, and it's at $3,000. So the total monthly projection for translation services is $7,776, or approximately a little over $93,000 a year in increased costs. And that is our update to this date, and happy to answer questions. Again, we'll be providing additional information on the other elements of the ordinance and some additional details with respect to the agenda posting and the translation services and some of the other elements at your council's March 23rd meeting. So happy to answer any questions. And again, both the city clerk and the director of community engagement are here and available.
Thank you so much, Sue, and really appreciate the overview. It's something that I know we're all trying to figure out how the best practices that we're trying to implement are actually going to work out in reality. So council members, anybody have questions to start?
I don't have questions, but I did just want to say thank you so much to our staff who work so diligently to help execute this, and realizing that it is a ton of work that we're, additional work that we're putting on you guys. So I just wanted to give my gratitude and see if, there was any way that we could assist, Mayor. that we make sure that we do that, because we do want to provide to the community, but not at the cost of burning out our staff. So that's my two cents.
Yeah, my question is sort of just a general one, and just asking sort of for a candid response. With some of the challenges that you laid out, Sue, are there parts of this ordinance that are being felt to be unworkable? And are there sections that staff would be interested in offering amendments to?
From my perspective, I don't think we're ready to address any potential amendments. I think that there may be some refinements that we may suggest, but we're not ready tonight to make those recommendations. I also want to say that we all very much appreciate that the council set a effective date 6 months out. It's very helpful for us to be able to work through these, to implement it in a more gradual fashion. Again, our focus thus far has really been on the agenda requirements and the translation requirements, the timing, and this is giving us an opportunity to try it out. And I think we all very much appreciate not only that ability to roll it out in a gradual way, but also the ability to evaluate and the opportunity to make suggestions if we feel that that's necessary or appropriate. So very much appreciated.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think one of the things that interested council was to see, because things have been done the way that they were done prior to this for a long time, is this the sort of thing where once we work out the kinks and everybody gets in a rhythm, does that make it easier? Or as I just asked, are there process changes that we need to consider to make it so that we're achieving what we'd like to achieve? Magali, Stephanie, anything to add?
Like Sue said, we appreciate the 6 month time to work out the kinks and figure out what's going to work. This report out is really only taking into a couple of meetings so far, and they're fairly short, so I don't think we have enough information or enough meetings behind us to give a full evaluation of impacts. When we start getting into more complex agendas, I think that's where we're going to really see where the impacts are with staff and to provide more meaningful information. But for this subcommittee and for the meeting on the 23rd, we'll have a little more on the 23rd, but it's not until we get a few more meetings under our belt to assess the impacts that we'll have more meaningful information to give to the council. But the clerk's office does appreciate the time to work things out, the kinks out, and figure out what's going to work best for our purposes, and then also to help staff, guide them in a way that will get their agenda items in to meet the ordinance requirements.
Great, thank you. And I would like the record to reflect that when you said that we've had short meetings so far, eyebrows were raised from every member of the subcommittee. Magali, anything to add before we go to public comment?
I just want to say I'm very appreciative of the fact that now we'll be providing translation for meetings, and it's going to really make a huge difference. So it's an honor to be part of sort of this historical time that we will be living as we see other committee members show up to the table. So just really looking forward to seeing that unfold.
Great. Let's go ahead and go to public comment, see if folks have any comments on this item. If you do, go ahead and hit the raise hand feature of Zoom. We'll start with Eric.
Eric, I have unmuted your microphone. Do you see the timer on your screen?
There we go. You should hear me now.
Wonderful. Yes. Okay. I will go ahead and start your timer.
Okay, thank you very much. And thanks again for allowing me to continue to contribute. Like Magawi said, I also am very excited about what's happening. I think that you guys are setting up sort of a model approach to this open government issue. So I encourage you to keep a logbook or a journal so that other jurisdictions can really get in on the inside of this. I think what you're doing may be a little bit novel compared to other jurisdictions. Here's my list of things here. I noted that the cost projections did not include a summary of staff time expenses, I don't believe. That just seemed to be external costs. Public comment should probably include AV materials. For reference, you can look at the California Coastal Commission and how they do that. But I know that an informed public is going to want to be an engaged public, and the use of AV materials would be the way to do that. When we look at Legistar, currently, meeting locations are listed by address, when in fact the meetings are being held online. And as we open up again, I think in order to quell any confusion, you should be very careful about listing meetings as virtual meetings versus putting an address and clean up that Legistar. I wasn't sure where the Gov delivery is signed up. It doesn't appear to be launched off of Legistar. I think that's off of the individual pages pertaining to a board. And also, I wasn't sure if this ordinance applies to other boards and working groups and so on and so forth that the city has. And if so, if it doesn't, I think that it should. And there certainly are elements that all meetings should really subscribe to, like having a video or audio recording, the minutes, the agendizing, all these types of things I think should apply carte blanche to all government meetings. It is interesting seeing sort of the unintended consequences of what you're doing. And so I really appreciate being, here now to sort of take a look at that. I think it's, incredibly fascinating. The last thing that's on my list is that by state law, you're supposed to be publishing a list of the platforms that you use for information collection and dissemination. And I don't think I've seen that from the city yet. The county does have that list posted on their website, but it is really helpful to know what type of, how the information is available, what type of systems are being used as far as platforms. Thank you. My 3 minutes is up. I totally appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Really appreciate it, Eric. Do we have any other comments from folks?
There are no hands raised for public comment.
Okay, and how about voicemail public comments?
No voicemail public comment for item 4.1.
Perfect. I'm going to go ahead and bring it back for the subcommittee. Do we have any additional thoughts? Councilmember Alvarez, I'll start with you.
Thank you, sir. First of all, thank you. Thank you for taking on the added workload. And I know it's being appreciated. Throughout my tenure, I've listened to a lot of Spanish speakers make their presentations on different subjects. I would say if there's a log to see how many participants are being had, although I would say internally, I believe that this is a seed that's being planted. And as time goes on, I know that we'll see more participation. But I think just for internally, for us to be able to gauge how we're doing with our Spanish-speaking community. And I'm wondering if that's something that's being done thus far.
I can answer that or part of it, but right now, Zoom does not have a way for us to gauge who is actually using the Spanish channel. We have asked them, and I know other jurisdictions across the state has asked Zoom if there's a way for us to find out who is actually tuning into the Spanish channel to use that. But currently there is not a way. I do know that at our city clerk's roundtable through the league, there was some discussion about the league possibly reaching out to Zoom to ask them to create some platforms or some programming that municipalities can use, especially in engaging the public and they would include that request through Zoom to kind of figure out a way for us to figure out who is actually tuning in and using the Spanish channel. But right now, everybody's on as an attendee, and we don't know if somebody needs those services until they come on and state that they need translation services.
Hopefully we'll be back to live personal meetings before Zoom creates that addition to their platform, right?
And I don't know if there's anything Magali wants to add or that I missed.
Yeah, I mean, we've in community engagement, we had some conversations around that. But at this point, like Stephanie said, it would be really difficult unless we created an additional mechanism, which would end up being, another obstacle for folks to go through. So we unfortunately don't have a solution yet to figure out a number of participants.
And I would advocate against that, an additional platform or as really, again, it's a seed that's being planted. And as our community becomes aware that they have this option, that's really what we're after. And even if there wasn't anyone who's participating in this yet, it's good for the community to know that they have this option and that the option is being available. And the efforts are being made to provide that option to our Spanish-speaking community.
All right, Madam Vice Mayor.
So again, inclusion is a high priority. So I'm just happy to see it all manifesting after so much hard work. And again, thank you for our staff and their flexibility and willingness to make it happen. I don't hear grumbling or anything. So I'm just very thankful that they have seen our vision and they are able to implement it and give us feedback. So again, I wish anything that we can do to help assist, please let us know, as the mayor has already asked, so we can try to help you guys to implement what we would like to see. Thank you.
Yeah, and I want to echo the comments from both of my colleagues, and in particular, Councilmember Alvarez. I'm glad you brought up the idea of planting the seed and letting it grow. When I first got on council, I started doing community office hours once a month. And the first 6 or 7 months for sure were pretty lonely to sit there at your office hours with nobody showing up or 1 or 2 people showing up. And it really took building the expectation amongst folks in the community that they could show up if they had an issue, that they could have that kind of a dialogue before I started to see regularly folks who are interested in it. And I feel like it's the same way with most of what we do in government. If we provide that opportunity, it's going to take a while for people to figure out that they have it. And once they take advantage of it, I think that it'll continue to grow. I will note that we've had a number of issues so far this year where I've heard from people ahead of or after the fact that it was a last minute thing, that they had no advance notice. It's been a great opportunity for me to educate them on how to get better engaged, how to check the agenda and see things are coming. And I have sincerely loved being able to say that Santa Rosa has one of the longest lead times where the public knows what's coming up on the agenda out of any jurisdiction that I work with and talk to across the US. So that's been a nice feather in our cap and an acknowledgement of the community engagement work that so many folks at City Hall are doing and the apparatus that we're building for the next generation to take over. So huge thank you. I look forward to our full discussion at the city council level. And I know some of our colleagues will have additional comments as well. I do think the suggestion that was made about including staff time to do this would be a very important metric for us to consider when we get there. Any final comments?
Yes, Mayor, if I could.
Yes.
Speaking of public comments, the journal, where we can actually reproduce the efforts that have been put forth by staff in regards to not only our surrounding cities to be able to use, but also for different departments within our city of Santa Rosa to be able to mimic and replicate. I think if there's a way for us to really journalize the efforts that have been put forth.
Just so council member knows, we do document our best practices as we go along. And that's what we did with Zoom when the pandemic first hit it. As we learned it and troubleshooted any glitches, we documented it and created a best practices document that we have shared with other jurisdictions as they were going through, because we were pretty much in the forefront of a lot of jurisdictions in using that. And so with this effort, we are documenting and creating best practices as we go along. And that's one of our best practices, is to create a best practice document as we implement new procedures and policies.
And Stephanie, that is why we're leading the Bay.
All right, great. Let's go on to item 4.2 here. What up, Danielle?
Hello. Good evening, everybody. I'll wait for my slides to come up here as I, all right, here they are. Great, thank you. So good evening, Mr. Mayor, Madam Vice Mayor, and Council Member. I'm here tonight to give you an update on the Open Government Task Force recommendations. Next slide, please. So in 2014, as many of you may know, former mayor then formed the Mayor's Open Government Task Force, which began meeting in January of 2014. This task force held a series of public meetings with input from the community and used that community input and discussions to create a series of recommendations, which were presented to the City Council on December 2nd, 2014. The areas of recommendations really focused on improving community engagement, increasing communication, and strengthening policies related to transparency. Next slide, please. So the immediate actions for council were to set a goal of openness and transparent government, and then set 3 strategic objectives for the organization, which included hiring a communications director, adopting a sunshine ordinance based on task force recommendations, and creating a city mission statement which embraces community engagement. Next slide, please. In addition to those immediate recommendations, they also recommended that the city develop a culture that values public engagement, develop a culture focused on communication, and develop policies that promote openness. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So, oh, that doesn't look good. I don't know what happened there. Update on the immediate actions for council. So that first one of setting a council goal of open and transparent government. This has been completed. In council goals, actually goal number 6, it states to provide for community safety, valued city services, and open government.
And Danielle, I will just mention really fast for the public that the linked presentation on the agenda item does have all of the information that's in there. It looks like there's just a translation issue between mediums.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's happening there. Thank you. For those 3 strategic objectives, I will talk a little bit about them in just a moment in some upcoming slides, but both the hiring of a communications director and adoption of the Sunshine Ordinance were completed. However, when you take a look at the city's mission statement, that has not yet been completed. And again, I will get into that in just a bit. So next slide, please. So looking at the culture that values public engagement, the task force did come up with some objectives and strategies which they recommended in this report. The first objective being that the city genuinely engage and partner with neighborhoods, volunteers, businesses, institutions, and other organizations which support our community. Next slide, please. And I'm really sorry, I don't know what is going on with these slides here, but again, the information is in the presentation that's linked in the agenda. So some of the recommended strategies included shifting definition of partnership to include community involvement, coordinating use of volunteers citywide, looking for opportunities to form partnerships with other community organizations and groups, and create opportunities for partnerships and ask for help in getting people engaged. So the updates around these are really in the programming that we have implemented over the last few years, including the Community Empowerment Plan, working with our AmeriCorps Vistas to partner with Sonoma State. So our Vistas actually work 1 day a week at Sonoma State each, and they work with staff and faculty at Sonoma State to find out what students' needs are around volunteer hours and service learning hours. And then they connect them with staff here within the city to get them the hours that they need for graduation. In addition to that, programming through the Violence Prevention Partnership, Neighbor Fest, and again, the Community Empowerment Plan are really helping us get to where we need to be with these strategies. I will note that these are just programs and not necessarily things that would build that culture or institutionalize community engagement. They're just actions that we are doing currently, and I'll talk a little bit more about what I mean about that in a couple of slides. So next slide, please.
One moment, Danielle. I'm actually going to be just pulling up a PDF version of the presentation so we can have the updated slides.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you, everybody, for being patient. Yay. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So another recommended objective is to further incorporate the Community Advisory Board in civic engagement practices. And we've done a lot of work with the CAB over the last few years in this area. Some of the strategies recommended were to clarify their role and mission, educate and outreach about participatory government, working with the team council, emergency preparedness, and also regular communication with the council. So in 2018, the CAB went through and completed a strategic planning process and developed their strategic plan, which was then adopted by City Council or approved by City Council in 2019. Part of the work that the CAB is, and I'll just mention the CAB's mission is to connect city government and residents so the public can have a voice in decisions that impact their lives and build a stronger community. In addition to that, the CAB also worked on developing a vision, strategic categories, and objectives. And one of the CAB's priorities is to educate and connect individuals and groups on how to best participate in their government. They're currently doing this through the development of Civic 101 videos and their Citizen Engagement Academy. We are currently not working with the team council. We don't have a team council. And one of the primary reasons for that right now is just lack of staffing resources and a budget for that. As far as emergency preparedness goes, one of the CAB strategies is to implement Neighbor Fest with city staff, which is really centered around disaster preparedness. Although, as we all know, it's suspended currently right now because we can't hold large events or gatherings during COVID. And regular communication with the council, the CAB does really try to report out regularly. So individual CAB members with their individual council members doing presentations to council. They also develop talking points and a recruitment flyer for council to use when we're recruiting new members. Next slide, please. Additional strategies include reassessing and restructuring the CAB. Again, as I mentioned before, they went through the strategic planning process, which really helped refocus where they put their energy into and making more of an alignment with council goals and priorities. In addition, to build on the excellent engagement model of the Santa Rosa Prevention Partnership, So the CAB is doing this through NeighborFest. Our goal in the future, once we're back in person and able to hold these events, is to then really start to reach out to businesses and other local organizations to help create neighborhood hubs. Next slide, please. Another objective under this recommendation is to make use of key strategies outlined in Matt Langer's discussion to effectively engage the community during decision making. And we're doing a lot of this work through the community empowerment plan, our listening sessions, so involving citizens in structured facilitated discussions, and giving participants in these meetings the opportunity to compare values and experience. So we're doing this right now in very specific projects and programs. So things like the community empowerment plan that are aligned with improving community relationships with the police department. Whereas we haven't really developed this structure yet to make it part of the culture and what we do for the organization. An example of how we could really institutionalize this and make it a part of the everyday work that we do here at the city. My best example right now could be around council goal setting. So we have heard from other jurisdictions that in addition to doing public hearings, they also hold a series of open houses where city departments come out, residents get to learn about different city services, programs, and projects. They get to answer or ask questions of city staff. They get to do activities with city staff, like learn how to develop a budget and then develop their own budget to kind of practice and see how that works. Some communities in these open houses actually allow participants to use Legos to build their ideal communities and really have that facilitated activity with other residents so that people can get others' viewpoints. And then city staff can also collect that information and using those open houses to do voting on district priorities and collect feedback from community. And in addition to that, using digital engagement platforms to gather that input for those who aren't able to come to the open houses. So that's just one example of how to really make that part of the culture and some of the bigger work that we do as a city. So next slide, please. All right, so another strategy within this goal is to establish Center as a leader in civic engagement with the goal of increasing openness, transparency, and accountability. Next slide. So these strategies include developing a cross-departmental framework in order to institutionalize a more collaborative approach to public engagement. So using that example, or going back to that example that I just gave, that's part of making community engagement part of the culture. Another way that we're doing this currently is developing a community engagement toolkit and training for staff, as well as developing tools such as meetings in a box, where we might not want to hold a community meeting in a specific area of town because we know people won't show up, or for example, right now, COVID. But we take those meeting materials and distribute them to community members by using a variety of different places like community centers, grocery stores, other community leaders who might want to go door to door as part of helping us out. So we're in the process of developing those tools as well. Expand the use of city mailing lists. Through our City Connections newsletter, we were able to get our mailing up to over 90,000 subscribers online, which we also use for emergency alerts. And then speaking of the City Connections newsletter, the next one is to increase direct communication from the City Council and the City Manager. And one of those recommendations was to create an electronic newsletter, a citywide newsletter. So we did do that. In addition to that, the Open Government Task Force also recommended things like brown bag lunches, coffee with a council member, listening forums. So to note, I know that the mayor does Mondays with the mayor. So that is one example of that in action, as well as our community empowerment plan listening sessions. And I believe another council member has also worked with our staff to do some community listening sessions around park development. Next slide, please. And we're getting ready to wrap up, I believe, this section here. So, so another recommendation for increasing transparency is around information sharing, using bilingual kiosks, overhauling the city's website, and encouraging in the next charter review, district elections and pay for council. We all know we have those districts already in place, so we've completed that. It sounds like pay for council is coming up as a point of discussion among the city council. And then we have completed the overhaul of the city website that happened in 2017. So the one thing that was not complete are those bilingual kiosks. When Director Barnes was with us in 2018, she worked with other city staff to conduct an analysis on how much that would cost. I don't have that number with me this evening, but I can get it to this group. And based on that cost, they decided to not move forward purchasing of those kiosks. So next slide, please. And then finally closing the communications loop. So in order to foster a spirit of collaboration in problem solving and decision making, really closing that loop. And we are currently doing this through our community empowerment plan. So we held those listening sessions last year. We're currently developing a report, and we plan to go back out to the community and report our findings from that report before we take it to the city council. And I know that staff in the general plan update also have that as well as part of their community involvement strategy. And we are currently in the process of developing a community engagement strategic plan for our department, which will include information about helping our other city staff when they're working on projects, really closing that feedback loop with the community. Starting critical conversations earlier with the community. I cannot stress enough that this needs to be part of, that developing that culture of community engagement here with the community. Oftentimes we see or hear a lot of public comment around, well, I didn't know this was happening. How, this is the first time I've seen it happening. So I think that our planning and economic development team that's working on the general plan update is doing a really fantastic job with getting out there earlier in the process and getting that input and that engagement going much earlier than we normally see. Again, we also did it with the community empowerment plan, and we hope to incorporate that into our community engagement strategic plan as well. Next slide, please. All right, and so just wrapping up here. I know we're getting close to finishing off the culture that values public engagement. Increasing opportunities for diverse community engagement and effective participation. So this is still in process. So some recommendations could be utilizing council districts to identify meeting locations, strengthening neighborhood relationships with neighborhood groups. So we're doing this through the CAB. And we are actually, as of today, our agreement with Bang the Table, which has a digital engagement platform called Engagement HQ, has been finalized. And so I will be beginning next week to work with their staff to develop our digital engagement site. So more information to come on that, but that will allow us to engage with a broader group of residents. And then finally, build a strong civic infrastructure and how to engage people, or educating people on how to best engage. So we are, again, working on our strategic plan, the Civic Engagement Academy through the CAB, the Civic 101 videos, and our Civic Citizen Guidebook for participation. And next slide. Finally, moving on to goal 3, developing a culture focused on communications. So I mentioned before that we have hired a communications director. So there were different iterations of this. So first we started out with a director of community engagement. The first director was hired in October of 2015, second one in March of 2017, and then our new division director, Magali, here with us tonight, was hired in 2020. In addition to that, we also created a position called the Communications and Intergovernmental Relations Officer. Most of you are familiar with her, Adrienne. She became that officer in January of 2018 and handles all of the communications citywide. Overhaul of the city's website. So the new website was launched in 2017. We have heard a variety of feedback from community members about the website. Some of it being that the website is better, however, it's still not that user-friendly. And so we are in early talks with staff about how to address that. But as I mentioned before, we also are in the process of developing our digital engagement site. So that might help with some of the engagement issues with our current website. Next slide, please. Goal 4 is to develop policies that promote openness. And so the first recommendation was around adopting the Sunshine Ordinance, which, as you all know, happened last December. And then policy recommendations that exceed minimum requirements for meetings and public records. Again, that happens through the Open Government Ordinance. And we are also currently, as I mentioned before, developing that Citizens Guidebook on Participation. Next slide, please. So as we wrap up looking at the recommendations and updates on those recommendations from the Open Government Task Force, some things to think about. I strongly encourage you to assess current staffing budget and resources for implementation of the remaining strategies, particularly those surrounding community engagement. Prioritize with the remaining strategies, as well as the strategies that are already in the process of implementation. So what should be done first? Looking at funding to keep virtual engagement strategies ongoing. And we didn't really talk about translation here in this presentation, although I know it was brought up in the last presentation. Really think about assessing the need for in-house or staff translation services versus contract services, as those types of services, we're going to see an increase in those with the open government agreements. Next slide. And with that, I will take questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Danielle. And I really want to appreciate, based on our last conversation, how many of these don't say complete, but say ongoing, right? And I think that it is really building that culture at City Hall. I see it in our day-to-day when we're talking about issues, and I think that the public is definitely starting to see it as well. You did mention that I had 3 things down that we don't have in process or that we don't have ongoing or complete. One was the teen council that you talked about. One was the electronic kiosks that you talked about. And then one was the mission. And can you just remind us specifically what was the language in the Open Government Task Force recommendation around the mission? And if you could remind us why we're missing that, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, so the language in the recommendations is to create a city mission statement which embraces community engagement. And the current council mission statement, which I'm grabbing right now, is to provide high quality public services and cultivate a vibrant, resilient, and livable city. So that's a very broad statement. It doesn't mention community engagement, although it could be implied in there somewhere. But I think it could go a little bit further. A vibrant, resilient, livable, and engaged city would probably do the trick. But Unfortunately, I came in 2016, so I wasn't part of the initial conversations when they were talking about developing that mission statement. And the report doesn't really go into any detail as to what exactly they were looking for.
And I do, if I remember correctly, I think we last updated the mission statement 2018, early 2018, I think was when we did
so.
it. Mm-hmm. Okay. Council members, any other questions?
I did have a question.
Go ahead, Vice.
So one of my questions I think would be, I've had people reaching out from like SSU and SRJC about being of assistance to myself or other council members. In what direction should we point them? Because up until tonight, I didn't even know that there was something in place to assist with that. So
yeah, if you would like to send them my way, that would be great. And then based on what they're requesting or what they would like to help with, I can get them to our vistas. And then our vistas can help to, find where they need to be.
Okay. Secondly, coffee with the mayor or hanging out with the mayor, whatever it is. Any assistance that you guys can provide to other council members? I don't know the scope of what you do to assist with that, or if the mayor is doing it on his own. But I also was interested in doing something like that, and I brought it up, but I was not ever told that there is any way that I could get assistance with even publicizing it or trying to get it out to my constituents in District 7, as far as wanting to get people to come and have the ability to do that. So if there is something that you guys do, if you can just get it out to all the council members so we can kind of know where we can get support and assistance in that way.
I will hand that over to Magali and the mayor. I know the mayor did that on his own.
The staff has been quick to tell me that while I don't have them assisting me while we do the Mondays with the mayor, that doesn't mean that it doesn't create additional work for them on Tuesday.
Yeah.
So Magali, go ahead.
Yeah, just to kind of address that is something that we would love to be able to provide. And as Danielle was mentioning earlier, community engagement is going through a strategic planning process. So we are trying to borrow capacity through our violence prevention partnership as well. If we are able to have this opportunity of a intern, which we are hopefully finalizing our processes with, we can definitely look into it. But again, I mean, that capacity would be super limited because we're looking at, what a great experience for a young person, right? So we are looking into that, and we can definitely have more discussions around that. But we are wanting to make sure we're addressing capacity too.
Yeah, I would love to look at that. And also I am all for interns and youth and bringing them in just so they can see how things work and how they're done. I think that is a part of us diversifying our leadership here, and also the staff that we have on at the city is by bringing them in when they're in school and when they're young, so we can get them right. So yes, anything that I can help and assist with that, I'll be more than happy to do that.
Yeah, we would love the opportunity to work with interns. We build that capacity in there. However, also being a first-generation college student myself, I think paid internships are really important. So we want to be mindful with that as well. So, but more to come, definitely.
And I will mention, Vice Mayor, there's a standing invite to council members that if they'd like to join one of the Mondays with the mayor and have it be focused on their district and issues in their district, that I'm always happy to do that as well. So let's definitely talk offline and set that up.
I want my own day of the week, Mayor. Thank you very much.
Well, but the Vice Mayor gets every day of the week.
Oh, so. I love it. Okay.
Councilmember Alvarez, any comments?
I appreciate the invitation, and I do need to take you up on that. You made that offer plenty of times, and I haven't taken you up on it. Mainly a comment for Vice Mayor Rogers. I believe that I was able to get some resources out of the city when I picked up issues that were standing, and we've had great luck with it. And I've been fortunate enough to be able to work with Gustavo and Jen Santos from the city of Santa Rosa. So I'm very appreciative of the staff's commitment to really move projects along that have been in Stillwater. For myself, it was actually the Santa Rosa Creek project and moving that project ahead. It's just a recommendation of what I saw working for me.
All right, let's go to public comment. See if folks want to weigh in. Start with Eric and then go with Pat, followed by Gregory.
You know it, and thank you very much for allowing me to participate again. I suppose you can hear me okay?
Yep, go for it, Eric.
Countdown has started. So I do, of course, want to reiterate that as we migrate to physical meetings, that you strongly consider, in fact, plow ahead with having a virtual component to it. I think that just totally makes sense for people that don't want to leave their house or are into technology now in order to participate. Things need to be not only bilingual, but omni-channel. And so a lot of times I'm seeing things that are still pretty linear, and I'm not really seeing sort of the multifaceted or omni-channel aspect of outreach. And here's where my comments get really critical. I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what you mean by engagement. I think the city's main role is to be sure that they inform and educate the population, and from that comes organic engagement of people that want to be engaged. If you're saying that only engaged people are informed, you're never going to get a decent percentage of people that then are informed. If the processes are created around this concept of engagement, and that's how people become informed, 90% of the people are going to remain ignorant. I think that's a colossal miscalculation, quite frankly. And I have to be very critical of it because I see a lot of situations. Let's use Neighbor Fest as an example, where you're saying, okay, this is emergency preparedness. Okay, this is complete because we have this concept called Neighbor Fest. No, emergency preparation is here now, urgent. It is incumbent that the city take a role in informing and educating their population. Look at, if you were a superintendent of a school district and you had 179,701 students that were your responsibility, you would be held to an entirely different standard of performance. You would not just be able to say, oh, geez, it's just the students that were able to lead to an engagement strategy that are going to benefit from the pedagogy. No, an educator starts with how they can reach the lowest common denominator, not always just cater to the cream of the crop. I know from being a community organizer, how much effort it takes to continue the outreach. And you're never satisfied because you're never going to get other people standing with you in engagement. Most people just want the information. They want to be engaged. They want to be educated. They don't want to be engaged. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Eric. Pat, followed by Gregory.
Pat, please unmute your microphone and identify yourself for the public record if you so choose.
It looks like we might have left. We might have lost Pat. So let's go to Gregory, and she can either rejoin or Gregory could perhaps hand her the phone after.
Wonderful. Gregory, please unmute your microphone and identify yourself for the public record if you so choose.
Hi, this is Gregory Farron. I sort of disagree with Eric about engagement, but I won't go very much into that. The conversation in the past about getting people engaged was in a context of a city council that, as I remember, nobody really could talk directly to staff. You know, an individual citizen who wanted to talk to staff had a really hard time getting a hold of staff because we were all supposed to be either going through the city manager, who then went to staff, or to our city council person, who felt very uncomfortable engaging with staff about our issue. Now, Chris, you're raising the exact opposite of that, because you boldly said, talk to me and I'll connect you with staff. So my question is, how's that going with Sean? I mean, we have not had a real clear avenue to partner with staff, to become engaged with staff, to really, become active in the development of our city, except for, avenues like going through CAB or going through, or going to the city council and talking, to them in public comments. Yeah. So I guess what I'm saying is, you've opened up an avenue that says, welcome to our staff and to their activities. If you come to my, Mondays with the mayor and tell me about something, and I say, I'll connect you, connecting us with the staff is really crucial to engagement, and connecting us as groups or individuals is really crucial. I would like to know what you think has been the pushback from either the traditional way of doing things, which was don't mess with staff, talk to either the city manager or to the council as a whole, but they didn't really encourage us to be able to start working with the city directly. And now you're suggesting, and all of you are, I think, doing the right thing, which is opening up the door for real partnership between the community and the city, employees and department heads and other folks. So if you could give me some, feedback about, is that going to continue? Is, the city really changing its culture? And by the way, at the very beginning, when I heard our city attorney talk about, her work on this, I said to myself, these aren't just words. This lady believes in it. And I just want to thank her for that.
Yeah, absolutely, Gregory. And I'll touch on that after public comment when we come back. And let's go to Pat.
Okay, can you hear me?
There you are.
Oh, great. I missed the unmute button. I just want to acknowledge that the staff report from community engagement really is a very, very initial response to the recommendations of the Open Government Task Force. And I want to point out a couple things. I totally agree with Eric. NeighborFest is not going to get us to emergency preparedness. There has to be a much more significant effort and organization to get that process going. The community empowerment strategies, we have to acknowledge, came out of a response to a citizens' uprising and civil disobedience, and really that response was an emergency response. I would like to say that we can, and I hope that we will expand that discussion. There was some excellent targeted discussions, but I think the whole community has to engage in that effort, and I really would like to see that happening. I also think a community empowerment strategy can be much broader than the police, and I hope that that will be in the future. I think the community engagement department strategic plan should not just be a department strategic plan, but should be a community. What is our strategic plan in this city for community engagement? And I would really like to see that happen or be included. And again, that process be much more open. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Pat. Do we have any other public comment?
There are no more hands raised for public comment.
Okay. Any voicemail public comments on this item?
No voicemail comments either.
Perfect. I'll bring it back to the subcommittee. And so first, thank you, Eric and Pat and Gregory and others who've been involved in this for a long time, and for continuing to hold the city's feet to the fire on what we had promised to deliver and whether or not we are there. And obviously you've heard, I think many of us talk about this being an ongoing process. So there is relative, right? And I know we'll have our next discussion will be about future agenda items. And I've heard just in some of the comments, some suggestions on where we could go next in some of these conversations. So I appreciate that. Gregory, you asked specifically about I think it was more of a culture question around the willingness of staff to engage directly with the public. And I think from my perspective, and I can only really answer this from my perspective, I think that one of the things that we have done very well over the last couple of years that helps facilitate this is our goal setting process and getting very clear direction from City Council on what issues and priorities staff are to be spending their time on. And I think, and at least this could be the perception that I had prior to getting elected, it oftentimes felt like because staff are so overworked that if they didn't have a clear majority from council authorizing them to work on an issue, one issue or another, that sometimes it felt like that there was a lack of interest. And I don't think that that's quite what it was. I think it was focused on the goals and the expectations. I think we're being much more clear as a council and as a community on where we need to go. And I think that staff has been doing a really good job of trying to be engaged on all of those different aspects. And I've certainly, in my time on council, have always, when I have had somebody email me or call me with an issue and I connect them to a staff member, they've always been fantastic about helping to get whatever that person needs done. So I don't know if it's a change of perception. I don't know if it's something that we're doing different, but I certainly feel like staff is being responsive to the community and really does value that input and understands that not everybody knows how to navigate City Hall and trying to be respectful of that and trying to help folks out. I'll see if any of our staff members in particular have something that they wanted to touch on with that.
If I could just kind of comment to the community empowerment plan, and I just kind of want to let folks know that through the framework that Seed Collaborative will be applying, which is targeted universalism, we will be providing space for the rest, for the entire community moving forward. I mean, that was just a very sort of concerted effort, but that is something that we're looking at, and we're going to be having their guidance to set something that is sort of aligned across the city.
Great. Anyone else? Council members, any thoughts?
Well, I really want to echo what you stated, Mayor. Really looking at the obstacles that COVID has really put it in our way, and yet seeing the amount of engagement that I've personally witnessed from our city staff in regards to community issues is quite impressive. And I'm very excited of thinking towards the future once COVID is not or is no longer an obstacle or a hindrance, what we can actually accomplish. So I'm very excited to see what we're able to do together moving forward.
Excellent. Vice Mayor?
Well, I heard the request to keep the virtual component when we go back to physical meetings, and I think having people participate virtually has allowed us to broaden the people. Like, you can cook dinner and do it. You can technically be on your lunch break at work and participate. So I think that those are all great things. I do want to say, I don't know how it has been in the past with staff and them directly helping community members. I think that's why it's very important for us to be, as council members, kind of gatekeepers, so that we can stick to what our goals are. If we have 20 members of the community asking one staff to do something, anything, then I think it does concert the efforts to go in different places, and it may not be the way that the council as a whole would want the staff time used. So it's very important to look at that also, that we're always open to hear your comments, questions, or concerns. So if there's something that needs to come along, or you want to have a meeting with us, by all means, send us an email. And I know myself and the mayor and Eddie, so everyone that's on right now, I know that we make an effort to meet with people when they request to have a meeting, or they have a comment or a question or a concern. So just keep bringing it back to the council members, and we have open door policies, and we want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, and I especially feel that way now with district elections as well, is that there's a level of intimate understanding of the issues in the districts. And so I want to highlight that as well. Stephanie, did you have something to add?
Yes, just going back to the issue of that was brought up about hybrid meetings. I just want to let the subcommittee know that I have directed staff to research how to do hybrid meetings and look at best practices. So we are in process of looking at those and how we can implement that once we go back into physical meetings and to continue hybrid meetings, because we have recognized that it has increased community engagement in our meetings. And so we want to keep that going. So just to let the subcommittee know that that is currently being researched and best practices looked at. Again, we probably will be on the forefront of that and developing best practices for other jurisdictions.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. And I do intend for this subcommittee to have that conversation, to look at what those best practices are when staff has a chance to put that information together. And Stephanie, do we have any data that we've started to collect to compare engagement so that we can really articulate to folks what the impact of a virtual environment did from an engagement perspective?
I do not have any of that data. I don't know how we would capture that other than looking at how many attendees were at each of the meetings. But just from my own experience, the public comment and email comment submitted has been a lot more than it was when we were just in physical meetings in the chamber. So I would say that the engagement just right there has increased significantly, I would say.
Okay. Well, more on this to come for sure. We'll move on to item number 5, since this is dovetailing perfectly with that conversation. It's future agenda items. Quick discussion on what could potentially be coming up on the next agendas for the Open Government Subcommittee. Sue, were you introducing some of this?
I did not have specific items. I would mention a couple of things that will be coming forward and may touch this committee, which would be our redistricting. We will be required to, by state law, to re-examine our districts after we receive the federal census. We do expect to receive that data by the end of September, next September, and we will then have a relatively brief period of time to consider revisions, any needed revisions to our current council districts. The council will also have the opportunity to consider whether to do a complete review and perhaps revamping of the districts, or to keep it a more narrow adjustments to adjust for any changes in populations. So that's one area, and that may come to this committee, or it may go straight to council. That would be certainly within your prerogative. The second item, which I'm sure will come to this committee, is that we will be looking at the possibility of some charter amendments. And there are a few charter amendments that staff is looking at. One in particular is to align our charter with our current district-based council elections. And there are some other kind of cleanup items that we'll be looking to kind of a variety of things. One came up the other day in considering whether we want flexibility as to whether our meetings will continue to be required to be on Tuesday, because if we end up at some time in the future joining in a civic center with other public agencies, we may need to have some flexibility. So a number of kind of cleanup items there, but You'll also have the opportunity, and council will have the opportunity to consider additional items for a potential charter amendment. You know, one has already been raised this evening, which is payments for council members. So that is certainly a topic that may come to this committee and certainly will come to the full council. I will caution, as I have cautioned before, that the more significant items that we put into a potential charter amendments, the more work is going to be required by staff. And we will need to look overall at the council's goals and priorities for this year and balance that with how much can we take on in a charter amendment. So those are two areas that I don't think that may come to this committee.
I appreciate that, Sue, and I've been very clear with people on some of the ideas, hundreds of ideas that I have for charter review, and Sue is making sure that I only push a couple of them.
Yes.
So,
Thank you.
Council members,
I appreciate that.
yeah, paid council members, ranked choice voting, and at-large mayor are currently my top three, but that might change, Sue.
Okay.
Let's go ahead and start with public comment on this and hear from you. There is a couple of things that were on the agenda that were listed that we are interested in talking about. Revising the lobbyist ordinance is one that we have previously talked a little bit in this entity about. Next steps for the Open Government Task Force recommendations, as well as additions to the community engagement work. And yes, we heard some of those public comments on the last item as well, and we'll keep them in this discussion. I'll go to Eric to start.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you guys. I really do. And I don't have any disagreement with Greg. I think the issue here is that engaged citizens are great, but just as this meeting tends to prove, there's just a handful of us participating when in fact the stakeholders number in the tens of thousands. And wherever we look when it comes to the engagement equation, we're never going to get a robust number of people being informed. We just aren't. So what I propose is that we do have measurements about the general public's knowledge base. And there are tools that you can use to understand how knowledgeable the general public is about important issues. You can contact me and I can tell you some of those best practices. Hand in hand with that is understanding civic engagement best practices. There's a lot that's been omitted from this. It doesn't even come close to best practice when you look at some of the things that technology companies are doing in the GovTech space. Some of my clients are the leading firms that do that. And there's a lot to be learned there in their knowledge base. I would also suggest that you orient things so that people can engage in an ombuds approach. I know as a community leader, even though I'm not an elected official on the city council, my neighbors look to me to handle problems and be able to triage problems successfully. I might say that one of those civic engagement best practices is built around 311 technology. The ability to have questions, whatever the question is, come from the citizenry to a help desk where it's triaged through technology. It can terminate with an actual caller taking that call and helping that citizen resolve whatever question it is or whatever complaint that they have or whatever. That's true engagement. That's lowest common denominator engagement. And that's really what I mean about best practices. When it comes to the charter amendments, I'm all ears. Yeah, it's a great time to change. I think with the district elections, I would really be excited to see somebody put into place an elected mayor as opposed to the structure that we have now. And perhaps that will address some of the problems that we have as informed citizens wanting to get involved and finding that there's roadblocks really at getting at the information, getting at what seems to be cooperation or perception of cooperation, and we can knock down those barriers. Thanks again. I appreciate your time and have a great evening. Stay healthy, please.
Absolutely. You too, Eric. Next, we have Gregory.
Okay, Eric, I agree with you. Because we really do need to figure out how to get a robust conversation among the citizenry about the issues, not just a few of us, calling in and giving our advice, and not even just a few people getting appointed to a charter committee or a districting committee and talking among themselves. We've got to broaden it. The conversation has to engage the community by exactly what you're talking about, getting them to either talk among themselves and then reveal it to us, or talk directly in a large scale, maybe electronic, vehicle. Unless we get people both educated and talking to either the council or large groups of people who the council trust, we're never really going to know what they think, and we're never really going to, more than that, engage them in solving problems. SRT has always consistently said that, we're not looking to the city to solve all the problems of the city. It really is a partnership between the community and the city, and it just seems to us that for a long time, the city hasn't really taken the community very seriously about solving problems and identifying those that we need to work together on. All of those things you described, Chris, about what we should do with our city, and all the things that we heard a report about in terms of trying to figure out a way of getting people educated, take a partnership. They take a real working relationship, and we still don't have the tools to do that.
All right, thank you, Gregory. We can keep working on that for sure. Are there any other comments on this item?
There are no more hands raised for this item.
Okay, and any voicemail public comments?
And no voicemail comments for item 5.
Perfect. I'll bring it back. Council members, any additional thoughts on what you would like to see on a future agenda for this subcommittee?
For me, it's a compliment for city staff again. Right now during the pandemic, I love to see that we are taking the steps to formalize strategies that will be implemented once we can engage the community face to face, and I love to see that.
Vice Mayor?
I just wanted to thank Gregory and Eric for, calling in and letting us know their viewpoint. And thank you, Gregory, for acknowledging that really it takes a team and we all have to play our part on the team to get things done. We can't do it on our own. So thank you for, I knew it, but thank you for verbalizing it, because it really does make a difference. So thank you.
Great. I don't have any additional input other than what I said at the beginning. Really, this is going to be an ongoing conversation. So Eric, Gregory, others, absolutely happy to talk with you anytime. And we'll keep working on this to build that plane so that it doesn't matter who's flying it, but that we can continue to see that engagement in the coming years and decades in Santa Rosa. Sue, Stephanie, Magali, any last thoughts? All right, then we've been efficient tonight. We're gonna adjourn 9 minutes early. Thank you everybody for participating, and we'll see you soon.